Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments down below. I read them. Today we have a question from our friend Ash H, who says, Hi Ramsey, people often say that the UFC is the be-all, end-all of MMA competitions, that the best fighters of OneFC and the like can't hold a candle to the best fighters of the UFC. How true do you think this is? I would think because other promotions don't have such an emphasis on character building, acting, and heels, and that the UFC has one of the most limited rule sets, it wouldn't turn away as many good, but boring fighters. Or is it because the UFC pays the most, and the best just naturally flow into the UFC? Well, there is that issue of money. Money makes the fight game turn around. Not the world so much, but the fight game. Sure. Yeah, man. If there is an organization that pays more, better fighters are going to gravitate in that direction. I think the big determining factor, however, isn't just the money. It's something that costs more than money, which is the ability to effectively promote a fighter. Quick, off the top of your head, name as many OneFC fighters as you can. Specifically the ones who didn't fight in the UFC. I can think of a few. Mostly people that I personally know. And I live in Asia. I live here. I actually competed in OneFC before it was OneFC, back when it was still martial combat. And then it got reworked and rebranded as OneFC. And even I, as a guy who watches OneFC, off the top of my head can name a handful of fighters. Now, for those of you out there who maybe you're not an avid OneFC, you don't live in Southeast Asia, you don't see it on TV where you live, how many OneFC fighters can you name? My guess is probably not a lot, somewhere on zero. Now, quick, name all the UFC fighters you can. Oh man, I can name so many UFC fighters from the modern age, from the previous eras, from when UFC started. I mean, let's start with Royce Gracie, man. Everybody knows Royce Gracie, the first UFC champion. Who else do we have? Ken Shamrock, Frank Shamrock, all those old school guys, Tito Ortiz, Randy Couture, and that's just the old school guys, man, not to mention the new ones. I mean, we could talk all day just listing all of our favorite UFC fighters. Why? Why is that? Why is it so easy? I'll tell you why. Because the UFC is so incredibly good at promoting their fighters. And I know some fighters complain about this and they're like, well, my fight didn't sell, it didn't make a lot of money because the UFC didn't promote me as well as the other guy. But let me ask you this. Is OneFC going to get you that type of recognition? Are they going to promote you on the world level like the UFC does? Not right now, they're not. Make no mistake, there are good fighters in OneFC. There are some fantastic fighters in OneFC. I've got some friends in OneFC. They're good fighters. Like, I know these guys. And on any given day, if you have a good fighter versus another good fighter, either of those fighters could win. If you took the top guys in the UFC roster, it's possible that the top guys in the OneFC roster could give them a hard time or even beat them. It's possible. On any given day, roll the dice, change the circumstances, change the variables ever so slightly. Anybody can have a bad day. Anybody can have a good day. If you change the rules up, I mean, that's different. OneFC does have different rules if you don't know. Specifically, as far as kicking and kneeing the head of a downed opponent. In the UFC, you cannot kick or knee the head of a downed opponent. Once you have 4 points of contact on the ground, that's 2 hands and 2 feet. Or, if you're sitting or lying on the ground or kneeling on the ground, you are a downed opponent, and the standing fighter can no longer kick or knee your head. The body, the legs, that's fine. But in OneFC, kicks and knees to the head are allowed. They do have a weird by-rule about that, which is, and I hope I don't misquote this because I haven't read the by-rule for a long time, which is you need the express permission of the referee in order to kick or knee the head of a downed opponent. I don't know exactly how that works because I watch these fights where it happens and it doesn't seem like the fighter looks at the referee and asks permission, like, hey ref, is it okay if I kick this guy when he's down? The ref's like, let me think about that. Okay, yeah, go for it. That doesn't happen. Anyway, so I don't really understand that by rule. And as somebody who's reffed a bunch of MMA fights with different rule sets in different organizations across China over the years, that's really confusing to me. I don't know how that would work from the referee end. And as a retired fighter, looking back on my previous experiences, man, if you had to look up at the referee and get his permission before you could do a technique, that I just don't see that happening on the fighter's end, because you're so absorbed in the moment of the fight, you don't even notice the referee until he jumps in between you and calls off the fight. Anyway, that's a long aside there, but that's a confusing sub-rule in the OneFC rule set that I haven't really seen play out the way that it really does on paper. But yeah, it comes down to promoting the fighters. The UFC is way, way better at doing that. You could put crappy fighters in the UFC, and they have, and they would still be promoted better than the best of OneFC. That's the reality. Could that change in the future? Yeah, OneFC has grown tremendously in the last 10 years. Let's see, when was it that they switched from martial combat to OneFC? It was 9 or 10 years ago. But yeah, man, they have, Victor Quay, the guy in charge of OneFC, he knows what he's doing. He is a very, very smart businessman. And he's taken that show from a very rocky start to, something really, really good. So, I've got absolute confidence that OneFC is going to be something really, really big in the future. It already is pretty big. It's a big deal, especially in Southeast Asia. But in the future, yeah, the answer to this question will probably change. But at the time, the UFC, man, they are going to promote you better than anyone else right now. That's my opinion. I'm sticking to it for the moment. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.